Begin today by the Mishnah on Daf Tzadik Gvav Amud Beis, the Mishnah at the beginning of the Yomud. Zogt Heilige Mishnah, Ben Tes Shonim V'Yoyim Echad Shaba Yevimtei. A 9-year-old that was Miyavim, his Yevama, then V'achakach, after he was Miyavim, his Yevama, Ba Aleo Achiv Shu Ben Tes Shonim V'Yoyim Echad. His brother, which is also 9 years old in a day, whether it's a twin or it's a brother in that age group, so he also has bia, he's miyavim the Yevama. So what happens? Paisel al yadai. So now the second brother will passel the first brother from having a relationship with this Yevama. So as Rashi explains, the reason for the Tanakama's opinion here is the bia of a 9-year-old is equivalent to the koyach of Kedushin midrabanan. Kedushin midrabanan by a Yavam only has the effect partially. It doesn't create a full kinyan. Similar, the bia of a 9-year-old Minatayre does not take effect at all. But Chachamim gave the bia of a 9-year-old to be as strong as the Kedushin Midrabanan by a Yavam. So therefore, after the first Yavam, the first 9-year-old had bia with this Yavam, the second brother, the other 9-year-old that comes along and does bia, the second bia takes effect. Like the halacha is, as Rashi brings, we learned before in the Masechta, that if one brother does maimer, then another brother, a second brother does maimer, the second maimer takes effect because the first maimer was not kind of completely, so there's room for the second maimer, for the second Kedushim Midrabanan to take effect. It's the same here with the bia of a 9-year-old and then a second bia of another 9-year-old. So now if the bia of the second 9-year-old takes effect, so that will require the second 9-year-old to give a get for this bia. Once he has to give a get, so now as Rashi brings, that if you have to give a get, which means that you're sending away this Yevama, you can't anymore be baina, you can't anymore fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum. So that's why the first 9-year-old will not be able to fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum. Rab Shimon says, Loi paisel. When the second brother does the bia, he does not passel the first 9-year-old of continuing the relationship with this Yevama. And the reason is because Rab Shimon holds that the bia of a 9-year-old, it's not a partial bia, it's not a partial marriage. Tanakama says that the bia of a 9-year-old is a marriage midrabanan, similar to maimer, which is a kinyan midrabanan by a yavam. So because it's a partial kinyan, so therefore the bia of the second yavam takes effect as well. But according to Rab Shimon, it's not partial. Rather, the way Rab Shimon looks at it is, this bia of this 9-year-old is a suffix. Do we consider it to be a good bia and therefore took effect, or maybe it did not take effect? So if it's a suffix, so then mimanavshach. If the bia of this 9-year-old took effect, so the bia of the first 9-year-old took effect already, and now she's fully married to him, so the bia of the second 9-year-old does not take effect at all. If the bia does not take effect because he's only 9 years old, so then just like the first one didn't take effect, the second one didn't take effect. So therefore the second brother that did bia after the first will not passel the first brother of continuing his relationship. Weiter the Mishnah says, Ben Teshanim V'Yoyim Echad, a 9-year-old Shaba al Yevimtei, that had a relation, he was miyavim his Yevama, V'achakach Ba al Tzarasa, and then now he went and he also was miyavim the second wife as well. So you don't do Yibum for 2 wives, but he went ahead and did Yibum for one, and then he did Yibum for the other. So usually, if you're having a relationship with a second Yevama, there's no such a thing as a second Yevama. So that second relationship is insignificant, it does nothing. But again, because we're talking about a 9-year-old, and his relationship that he had with the first Yevama, according to the Tanakama, is only partial. It creates a partial kinyan. So therefore now, if you're having a relationship with the second wife, that also takes effect. And if that takes effect, so now you're going to have to give a get to the second Yevama. So once you have to give a get to the second Yevama, so therefore, so now you can't anymore continue the relationship not with the second wife and not with the first wife either. You have over here two of these wives. The din by Yevama is that bayis echad baina, and you're not baina shnei batim. So usually the second one would not take effect, but over here the second one did take effect. So once you have to give a get to the second Yevama, so therefore you can't anymore continue the mitzvah of Yibum at all. Rab Shimon Rab Shimon in this case argues and says, Loi paisel. If you had a relationship with one Yevama and then you went and had a relationship with the tzara, with the other wife, the second bia did not take effect at all. As I mentioned, Rab Shimon's opinion is Memanavshach. If the bia of the bentes is a bia, so then the first one took effect, the second one did not. If the bia did not take effect, so then the second one did not take effect either. Tanya, so we learned in the Braise, where the Braise spells out and explains the opinion of Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon said to the Chachamim, in bia rishayna bia, if the bia of the first 9-year-old for this Yevama took effect, so then bia shniya bia. So then, for the second Yevama, it did not, or the bia the second time of the second 9-year-old, or bia for a second sada did not take effect. Ve'im bia rishayna bia. But and if the bia the first time by this 9-year-old is not counted and does not take effect, so then bia shniya nami ain't a bia. So the second bia is not a bia either. Like I explained, according to the Tanakama, he considered bia of a 9-year-old to be equivalent to maimer, which is a kedusha midrabbanan, that's a partial kinyan. But Rab Shimon says no, that it's not a partial kinyan. And actually, the truth is, we learned before in the Masechta, Rab Shimon holds regarding maimer as well, the same thing. Maimer is not a partial kinyan. Either maimer takes effect or it does not take effect. It's a suffix. So therefore, Mimanavshach, the second bia will not take effect there. So what it said in our Mishnah does not follow the opinion of Ben Azai. In our Mishnah, we had two different cases. We had a case of 2 Yevamin, that a 9-year-old doing bia with 1 Yevama, and then we had a case of 1 Yavam doing bia twice for 2 different Yevamas. And in our Mishnah, it compared the two. But here we see Ben Azai disagrees. Why? The Tanya and Abraisi we learned Ben Azai Yaime. Ben Azai said, Yesh maimer acha maimer. You could have one Kiddushin midrabanan, then another Kiddushin midrabanan, b'shnei Yevamin. If one Yavam did one maimer, and then another Yavam does another maimer, so Chachamim gave the koyach of Kiddushin midrabanan to each Yavam. So therefore one maimer after another can take effect if you learn, like the Tanakama's opinion is, that the first maimer took partial effect, partial kinyan, so now the second maimer will take effect as well. But v'yevama achas, b'shnei Yevam v'yevama achas, that is okay. But v'ein maimer acha maimer, but there is no maimer after a maimer that was already done before here. B'shtei Yevamos, if we're talking about 2 Yevamos, the 2 wives, v'yavam echad, and it's only 1 Yavam that's repeating the maimer again by 2 different Yevamos, because 1 Yavam does not have the koyach midrabanan to create a kedushin twice. And similar over here regarding the bia of a bentes, that's the same, similar to the takana of maimer. It's also a midrabanan that this bia takes effect. 1 Yavam that's bentes cannot do bia twice for 1 Yavama and another Yavama, and therefore Ben Azai disagrees with the second case of our Mishnah. Zok Teilige Mishnah, Ben Teisha Shana V'yem Echad, Shaba Al Yevimtai. A 9-year-old that had a relation with his Yavama. Umeis, and now he passed away. So now there are other brothers that are still here, and now the other brothers would have to do yibum for her. But the halach is chayletzes v'loy misyabemes. So now she could only do chalitze and not yibum. And this is based on something that we learned already about earlier in the Masechta, where over there it says that when you have a yevama, that the mitzvah of yibum for her is because of 2 brothers that she was married to. Over here, what happened? She was first married to a brother and she passed away, and now she fell for yibum because of that husband. And now a brother that was 9-year-old did a bia. Now that bia, according to the Tanakama, only created a partial kinyan, not a full kinyan. So therefore, to some extent, or really minatayra, the zika of the first yibum of the first husband is still in effect. But there's also now, if this 9-year-old that did the bia dies, so now there's also a zika from this 9-year-old. So there's also a zika from the second husband. So therefore, this woman now, when the brothers want to do the mitzvah of yibum for her, there is a reason. There's a zikah for the mitzvah of yibum from the first husband and the second husband. So in such a case, you can't do the mitzvah of yibum, so there's only chalitza. Nasa isha, if a 9-year-old marries a wife who makes and he dies, harezu petura. She's pater from yibum, pater from anything, because even if the bia of a 9-year-old is bia, but the kiddushin doesn't take effect by a cotton. So if there was no kiddushin, there was no marriage b'chlal. A 9-year-old that had a relation with his Yevama. And then when he becomes a gadol, nasi shacheres, he marries a second wife. So now he has 2 wives. One that he married that he had relations with when he was a cotton, that Yevama. And now another wife that he married when he was a gadol. Umeis, and now he passed away. So now, im lo yada sarishayna mi shehigdil, if his first wife, this Yevama, he did not have any relation with her after he became a gadol, so then harishayna chayletzes v'loy misyabemes. So this first wife, this Yevama, for her you could only do chalitza and not yibum, and this is the same halacha like the Mishnah said before, because for this Yevama, her mitzvah of yibum is coming from two brothers, from the first husband. That mitzvah of Yibum never was completely fulfilled because this Ben Tesha, this 9-year-old that did the mitzvah of Yibum, did not take fully effect, but it took partially effect. So therefore now this Yevama is coming from the first husband and also from this 9-year-old that had beer with her. So now you can't do Yibum for a woman that comes from two brothers. So that's regarding the first wife. V'hashniya, and the second wife, the second wife he has is a regular wife. So therefore for her, you can do chalitza or yibum. Again, Rab Shimon argues with the premise of this whole halacha over here in this case, and really he argues in the previous case as well. He does yibum to whichever one he wants, because Rab Shimon disagrees with this whole problem here, that there's an issue of a woman that her mitzvah of yibum is tied to two brothers. The first husband and now the second husband, because the second husband, which was a cotton, did a bia, and therefore it's only a partial bia, so there's still a connection to the first brother. Rab Shimon doesn't even hold to this case altogether, because when the second brother did bia, even though he's only 9 years old, either the bia took effect or it did not take effect. If it took effect, so she is now only a Yevama from the second brother. If it did not take effect, so she's a Yevama from the first brother. So therefore he'll be meyavim whichever one he wants, and then v'chaylitz l'shniya. And then you have to do, because there's a suffix over here regarding whether the second bia took effect or not, so therefore you have to do a chalitza for the second wife. Now the Mishnah goes back v'chlal to what we are speaking about in the last few Mishnayos here regarding the halacha of a cotton, the bia of a cotton. So echad ben tesh shanim, this halacha is whether he's 9 years old, v'yoyim echad, 9 years old in a day. V'echad ben esrim, even if he's 20 years old, but shalehevi shtei sidus, if he still doesn't have the two pubic hairs that are the sign of being an adult, he still has the halacha of a cotton, and the same halacha will apply. Amar Rave, so Rave said, Ha da Amar Rabbanon, this that Rabbanon said, Zikas Shnei Yevamin, that when you have a Zika, a woman that her Zika, her connection, the mitzvah of her Yibum comes from two brothers. Like the case that we have here in our Mishnah, when this Yevama came from her first husband, and then the second husband was only a 9-year-old and did the bia. So therefore, she's not fully connected to the second brother. So there's a Zika of both, of the first and the second husband. Mechlas chaltze yevume lo miyavnes. So we're saying that in such a case, you only do chalitze and you don't do yibum. You should not say that when do we say that this is the halacha, that you only do chalitza and not yibum. Heiche de iketzara. Only if there is a second wife over here, besides this woman, that has a zika, that the mitzvah of yibum is connected to two of the brothers, but there's also a second wife. The ikele migzar mishum tzara. So in such a case, there's a gzeira because of the tzara. Over here, if you're going to say that you can do yibum for this wife, and then you do yibum for the tzara as well, it's going to look like that you're doing yibum for two wives of the same person. You can't do yibum for two wives of the same person. So as Rashi explains this, really in this case, minat Torah, the two wives over here are not really two wives of the same brother. Because what happened? The first brother that was married to her, so really this is one of them is a Yevama of the first brother. Even though the second brother already he did bia with this wife, but he was only 9 years old. Minat Torah, that bia did not take effect at all. So therefore this wife is really still the first brother's wife. And now this 9-year-old married a second wife and he became a gadol now and it's his wife. So really these two Yevamas are two Yevamas of two different marriages, of the first brother and the second brother. Minat Torah. But midrabanan though, because the bia of the 9-year-old does take effect, so therefore it looks like you have two Yevamas of one man, of one marriage. So therefore Chachamim were geyser that in such a case you should not do Yibum for both of them, you do Chalitza for one of them. That's what the reason would be. So only if there's a tzara, so then you geyser this. But, says the Gemara, we see that in our Mishnah, we don't allow yibum for this woman that's coming now with a zika from two brothers, even in a case where you don't have a second wife, even in a case where this gzeira is not applicable. The hahacha over here in our Mishnah, lekitzada, over here there is no second wife. Over here in the beginning of the Mishnah, when it spoke about this case of a 9-year-old that did bia, and then he passed away, and the Mishnah says you can't do yibum, you could only do chalitza because she falls to yibum now from two brothers, from the first husband and now the second husband as well. There is no second wife over here. So we don't have this gzeira that it's going to look like you're doing yibum for two wives of the same husband. And still the Mishnah says, Mechlatz chaltza yivum eloi miyavme, that you do chalitza and not yibum. So it must be that the reason over here is not because of this gzeira, because of the tzara, but rather we're learning it from a pasuk, as the Gemara already brought earlier in the Masechta, that the yibum for a yevama could only be if she's a yevama that's connected to one husband and not connected to two husbands. Even when there's no reason to be geyser because of a second wife. Over here there's no second wife, b'chlal. Then the Mishnah said, Nasa isho meis. So if a cotton marries and he passes away, so there's no yibum, the marriage never took effect. Tanina la de Tana Rabbanan, so we learned here in the Mishnah, like we learned in the Braise, that Shaita v'cotton shenasu, Shaita and a cotton, they got married, and when they passed away, Nishisayim, Pturis min chalitza min yibum. So for their wives, there's no chalitza, there's no yibum, the kedusha never took effect. Then it said, Ben Teisha and Mishahigdil, in a case where you had a Yavam that was 9 years old, and he had bia with his Yevama when he was 9 years old, when he was a cotton. And then later when he became a Godel, so now he got regularly married to a second wife. So the Mishnah said, so for the first wife, since he is connected to the previous marriage and to him, so for her that is, there's a problem to do yivum. You could only do chalitza. But for the second wife though, which was a regular marriage, so for her you can do yivum or chalitza. Fragt the Gemara, why do we say this? Earlier in the Masechta we learned there that in such a case, even the second wife could only do chalitza and not yibum. Fragt the Gemara, v'yasu bias bentes. Why don't we say that now with this first wife, that this cotton married or did yibum when he was a cotton, so and that bia that he did is kemaimer begodel. It's equivalent to doing maimer when a person is an adult, as I explained before. Just like the maimer is a kedushin for a yavam, which a kedushin by a yavam only takes effect midrabanan. The bia of a cotton for a yavama is also only something which takes effect midrabanan. So they're both the same thing. So why don't we compare the two, and we should say v'titche tzara miyibum, and therefore for the tzara, for the second wife as well, there should be no mitzvah of yibum that you can do over here. This is a halacha that it said earlier in the Masechta regarding such a kind of case, when you have a woman that you did maimer for her, and the maimer took a partial effect, and therefore she's still connected to a previous husband, and now this second husband that did maimer passed away. And then he has also a second wife that was his regular wife. So the Mishnah there said, just like for this wife that he did maimer for her you can't do yibum because she's connected to two husbands, to the previous husband and to him that did kedushim midrabanan. So too we're geyser that for the second wife as well, even though she's a regular wife, there's only chalitza and not yibum. So over here we should say the same thing. When you have this woman that she was only his wife because of the bia when he was a 9-year-old, so that's equivalent to maimer, and therefore she's still connected to the previous husband and to him, so she can't have yibum, only chalitza, and so too the same gezeira applies to the second wife that is only chalitza and not yibum. That's what we learned before in the Mishnah and earlier in the Masechta. That's the question. So Amar Rav says we don't compare the bia of a 9-year-old to maimer of an adult to this extent. So loy osu bias bentes kemaimer begadol. We don't compare the bia of a 9-year-old to the maimer of a gadol regarding this halacha. By the maimer of a gadol, and there's a second wife, so just like for this woman that maimer was done for her, so now, if the husband dies, for her there's only chalitza and not yibum. So too for the tzara, there's only chalitza and not yibum. That's true by maimer, but not by the bia of a bentes. The bia of a bentes will not geyser so far for the tzara. Shmuel says asu v'asu. They did completely compare the bia that you do by a 9-year-old and the maimer of a gadol, that they're exactly the same thing. And therefore the gzeira for the second wife, that you should not be able to do yibum, only chalitza should apply. Rabbi Yochanan said they did fully compare the bia of a 9-year-old to the maimer of a gadol. If so, the question comes back, Viyasu. So why over here in the Mishnah do we not say that we consider this 9-year-old because his bia is just like the Maimer, so therefore the second wife should not be able to do Yibum either, just like the halach is regarding Maimer? Why over here does it say that the second wife could do Yibum? Answers the Gemara, Tanoi, according to them, you'll have to say that the Mishnah here and the Mishnah earlier in the Masechta that discussed Maimer, there's a machlokes over here between these two Mishnayos. Hach Tane the Arba Achin, the Mishnah earlier in the Masechta regarding the case of 4 brothers, which over there the case was when one brother passed away and the second brother did Maimer and he has also another wife. And now the question is whether the third brother could do Chalitza, could do Yibum, that is, for any of these wives. And over there we said, once you can't do Yibum for that wife that you did Maimer for, because she's connected to 2 brothers, so too you can't do Yibum for the second wife. That's the Mishnah before in Arba Achin. So Gazar Mishum Tzara, over there, that Mishnah says that the reason you don't do Chalitza for a woman that you did Maimer for, it's a Gzeira Midrabanan. It's a Gzeira because people are going to say that you're doing Yibum for 2 Yevamos of one husband. That's what it looks like. So the Gzeira is only because of the Tzara. So therefore, the Tzara as well cannot do Chalitza. Cannot do Yibum, that is, only Chalitza. So that's what the Mishnah holds earlier. Vashminam begadol. There, the Mishnah tells me this halacha regarding Maimer by a gadol, but v'hu adim bekotten. The same halacha will apply regarding Bia by a cotton, that once you can't do Yibum for this wife that the cotton did Bia for her, because it's only a Bia midrabanan, so too, for the second wife, even if it's a full marriage, you can't do Yibum either. That's the Mishnah over there. And for Hai Dama Gadol, the reason why the Mishnah says the halacha there only about a Gadol, Mishum de Begadol Koi. That's the case. There's other halachas there, and that Mishnah is speaking about a Gadol. But the same would apply to a cotton. And on the other hand, V'tai Tana Da'achas Svirelei, the Tana over here holds, Asu V'loi Gazar Mishum Tzara. We consider the bia of a cotton to be just like the maimer of a Gadol. However, there is no Gzeira for the Tzara. This Tana over here holds that for this woman, that only bia was done for her from a 9-year-old, so she now cannot have the mitzvah of Yibum for her. That's because she's connected to 2 husbands. But there's no Gzeira for the other wife. For the Tzara, there's no Gzeira for the Tzara. You could do Yibum. And Vashmina B'Katan, the Mishnah is saying this halacha regarding this case of a cotton, and V'uadim B'Gadol, the same would apply regarding Maimer of a Gadol, that for the other wife that was regularly married, she could do Yibum. The reason the Mishnah here says the halacha regarding a cotton, the B'Katan Kai, because it's speaking about a cotton, but the same halacha would apply regarding the Maimer of a Gadol. It's a machlokes between the Mishnah here and the Mishnah in Perek Arba Achin. Sagt the Gemara, also Rabbi Lazar went, Omar l'shmaite be medrasha. He said this halacha of Rabbi Yechanan in the Bismedrash, but he did not repeat it in the name of Rabbi Yechanan. Shama Rabbi Yechanan heard that the halacha was said, and it wasn't mentioned that he's the source of this, and ikbid. He was upset about this. So all legabe Rabami v'Rabasi, Rabami and Rabasi went into Rabbi Yechanan to appease him that he shouldn't be upset at his student Rabbi Lazar. Amrulei, so they said to Rabbi Yechanan, Loi kachoya ha'maisa beveis haknesses shel Tveria. Wasn't there once a story that happened in the Beis HaKnesses of Tveria? Benager sheyesh beroishe glustere. They were arguing regarding a nager, a piece of wood that has a glustere, this piece on the top. That's a machlokes there regarding muktzah on Shabbos. So there was a machlokes about this halacha. Shenechleku by Rabbi Lazar v'Rabbi Yosi, and Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yosi had an argument about this halacha of muktzah, and it was such a fierce argument. They tore a Sefer Torah with their anger. So the Gemara right away interjects and says, "Karu sokadaitach." Is it possible that they tore a Sefer Torah? Ella, the Gemara says, Eimer, rather, what happened is shenikra Sefer Torah b'chamasan. A Sefer Torah was torn in their anger. There was such a commotion, and one was pulling the Sefer Torah in one direction, one was pulling it in the other, and it tore. V'hayesh Rabbi Yosi ben Kisma, and Rabbi Yosi ben Kisma was there. And Amar, he said, to me, I wonder, but if there's no Avodah Zarah here in the shul, and that's what they found out to be, that there was Avodah Zarah there in the shul. So in other words, what Ravami and Ravasi were trying to tell Rabbi Yechanan that you shouldn't get angry, because look what could happen as a result of anger. So after they said this to Rabbi Yechanan, ikbet, he actually became more upset about this. Amar, Rabbi Yechanan said, Chavruse, Nami, you also want to compare me like I'm a friend with my student Rabbi Lazar? You're bringing me a story of Rabbi Lazar and his colleague Rabbi Yosi that were arguing that me and my student Rabbi Lazar are like friends. Why are you bringing me the story? So Olegabei Rabbi Yaakov Baridi. Rabbi Yaakov Baridi went into Rabbi Yochanan to appease him. Amalei, so he said to Rabbi Yochanan as follows. It says in the pasuk, Kashetziva Hashem es Moshe Avde. Like Hashem commanded Moshe his servant, Kain Tziva Moshe Yeshua. This is what Moshe told Yeshua. V'cheinasa Yeshua. This is what Yeshua did. Lo heise davam v'kol Hashetziva Hashem es Moshe. He did not remove anything that Hashem told Moshe. But now he said as follows: V'chi al kol davar shama Yeshua. Do you think that everything that Yeshua said to the Yidden, he told them, Kach amali Moshe? This is what Moshe taught me. He didn't always say it in the name of Moshe. Elo Yeshua yeshiv v'dairish stam. Yeshua would sit and darshan stam without mentioning Moshe Rabbeinu by name. V'akol yedin, and everybody knows that whatever Yeshua says, he's repeating the Torah of Moshe. He doesn't have to say it by his name. Everybody knows. So therefore, Rabbi Yaakov Beridi said to Rabbi Yochanan, Af Rabbi Lazar Talmidcha. Same as with your student Rabbi Lazar, Yeshiv v'dairish stam. He sits and he darshans and he says a halacha stam without mentioning you by name. But v'akol yedin, everybody knows kishalchahi, that what he's repeating is really yours. Amalehem. So when Rabbi Yochanan heard this, apparently he was appeased by this. So he said to Rabami and Rabasi, why don't you have the ability to come and appease like Idi ben Idi, our friend? But now the Gemara wants to understand that Rabbi Yochanan, my time a kapet kulahai. Why did it bother him so much the fact that Rabbi Lazar said a halacha and didn't mention him by name? What's the big schus that he wanted that he should be mentioned by name? So the Gemara says, what is the meaning of the pasuk that says, I will live in your tent, Aylamim. So Aylamim literally would mean forever, but the Gemara here darshans Aylamim in two worlds. What are the two worlds? Could a person live in two worlds? Ella, so what the pasuk is saying is, David, it says in front of Hashem, Master of the universe, Yehi Ratzna should be your will, Sheyayimru Dvar Shmua Mipi Bailam Mazeh, that they should say over a halacha from my mouth in this world, even after I pass away. Why? The Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan said, Mishum Rav Shimon ben Yochi, Kol Talmid Chacham Sha'imrim Dvar Shmua Mipiv. Anytime a Talmid Chacham, they say over a halacha from his mouth, Bailam Hazeh, in this world, after he passes away, Siv Saisav, his lips, Doiviva is Bakever. His lips are moving slightly, even in his kever. And therefore, he's living in the world to come. He's living in Gan Eden, in Olam Haba, but he's also alive over here in this world when it's being said in his name. So this is what Rabbi Yochanan wanted, that Rabbi Lazar should say it in his name, so people should repeat it in his name, that it should be zeicha to this. That's why he was upset about this. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Zeire v'iteimesh Shimon Zire. My kara, where do you see the pasuk for this? That a person's lips are moving in this world, in this kever, when Allah is said in his name. Pasuk says, "V'chikech b'kayayin atoiv," and your mouth is full of good wine. Hoylech l'daydil l'misharim, it flows down. Doivev sifse yishenim, and the lips of the yishenim, of the ones that sleep, are moving. So what's the connection to the wine, to the grapes? K'kaimer shel anovim, like a pile of grapes that are waiting to be pressed, and they're sitting in a bucket, and they're sort of warm, and they're getting ready to be pressed. So ma kaimer shel anovim, just like this pile of grapes, kivin shemaniach adam etzba olav, person presses his finger into it, miyad doivev, immediately it bursts out some of the wine that comes out. So too, af Talmidei Chachamim, so too with Talmidei Chachamim, kivin she'oimrim dvashmuah mipiyim b'olam hazeh. When you repeat words of their Torah in this world, in their names, so their lips are moving in the kever. That's why Rabbi Yochanan wanted to have this chus. The Rebbe once spoke about this Gemara Barichis by a Fabrengen and said that this means literally kipshutai, that the lips of this Talmid Chacham and his kever are moving, and if it moves, it reverberates in the entire world. Anytime you have movement in one area of the world, the airspace around there moves and has a ripple effect in the airspace of the entire world, and it reverberates in the entire world. The Gemara means kipshutei mamish. Going back to what it said in the Mishnah, Echad ben tes shanim v'chulu, that when you have a 9-year-old or you have a 20-year-old that does not have yet the signs of an adult, the shnei saris, he's also considered to be a cotton. I'll ask you a contradiction. We learned that it says ben esrim shana shalei v'shtei saris, a 20-year-old that doesn't have the 2 hairs. Yavi a rai shu ben esrim, so you bring a rai for his age that he's 20 years old, v'hu asris, and he's a sris. and he can't have any children, so he's not a katan anymore. He can't do he's not chayiv no chalitza and no yibum, but he's not a katan anymore. Bas Esrim Shana, same as with a girl that's 20 years old, and she doesn't have the 2 hairs. Yavir Raishi Bas Esrim. So you bring a rai for her age that she's 20, via islandess, and therefore at that point she's considered to be an islandess, she can't have any children. There's no chalitza or yibum for her. So we see here that at the age 20, if you don't have any sidus, you're not considered a katan anymore. So the Gemara answers, no, but ha'itmar Allah, we learned regarding this Mishnah, Amar Rab Shmuel by Yitzchak, Amar Rav, so he explained the pshat of this Mishnah, but v'hu shenoldu le'simani sris. The age of 20 is not enough. You also have to have signs in the body to know that he's a sris, and similar by a woman that she's an islandess, which we had earlier in the Masechta, the Gemara explained what those simanim are. So it's not enough the age. Rava and Rava said, Deikanami, the words of the Mishnah prove this as well. Diktani, because the Mishnah said, V'hu hasris, and he is a sris, which means that it's not enough the age, but also that you can see the signs in his body that he's a sris. Shma mina, this proves, like we just said. Frakta Gemara, V'chi loy noildu loy simani sris. So if it's a case where you don't see the signs of this, that he's a sris in his body, and he's getting older and older, so at kama, up to what age is he still a katan? Tani de Rab Chiya, so Rab Chiya taught adroiv shnoisav. When it comes to most of the lifetime of the person, which is, it says Yemeish Nesenevem Shivim Shana, the life of a person is 70 years, so when he reaches age 36, he's not a katan anymore. Kiyasa lekamei de Rava, when they came in front of Rava, and he would see such a kind of case of a person that didn't bring shtei sidus, so you don't know if he's a gadol or not, what could you do about it? So if this person was very thin or weak, Amaluhu, he would say to them, Zilu avriyuhu, go and feed him and fatten him up, that maybe then the sidus, he'll have the simonim to show that he's a gadol. The reverse body, if it's someone that's very fat or very healthy, very big, Amaluhu, Zilu akhashu, let him be thinned out a little bit, because the hani simonim, these simonim of the 2 hairs that show the signs of an adult, zimnin de nasri machmas chishusa, it's possible that they fall off because of a person being too thin, v'zimnin de nasri machmas briyusa, and sometimes they can fall off because a person is too fat, too big. Hadran Allah Haisha Rabba, this is the conclusion of the 10th Perek of Masechta Yevamos. Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, we begin the 11th Perek, the Perek Noisen Alo Anusa in Masechta Yevamos. Sagt Heilige Mishneh, Noisen Alo Anusa v'ala mafuta. A person is allowed to marry any relatives of a woman that he had a relationship with her, whether by force or whether he seduced her. Even though the halacha is regarding a wife, of course, there's certain women that are her relatives you're not allowed to have a relation with, but that's only a wife that you married, not a woman that you had a relationship with her. Ha'oines v'ha'mefata. On the other hand, if you have your wife and you're having a relationship with another woman that's a relative to your wife, even if you didn't marry another woman, but just by force of you seduced another woman, chayiv, so that you will be chayiv for having a relationship with the relative of your wife. A person is allowed to marry an anusa of his father and mafuta of his father. You see, even though usually a person is not allowed, one of the arayas are not to marry the wife of your father, but if it's not a marriage, but your father just had a relation with a woman, whether ba'ainis or through a pitoy that he seduced her, so then it's not your father's wife and you can go ahead and marry her. Anusas b'nai, mafutas b'nai. Similar also regarding a son, even though you're not allowed to marry your son's wife, your daughter-in-law, but if it's not a daughter-in-law, but rather the son had a relation with someone, so then a person is allowed to marry that woman. Rabbi Yehuda Eiser, ba'anusas aviv u'mafutas aviv. Rabbi Yehuda says the anusa or the mafuta of a father is similar to a wife of the father, and you're not allowed to marry her. What we learned in our Mishnah is like what we learned in the Braise, where it says, Onas Isha, a person that has a relation with a woman by force without any marriage, Mutter, Lisa, Bita, so he's allowed to go and marry her daughter, so that in other words, the relatives do not become usher through this relationship. Nasa Isha, but if he married a woman, so that's his wife, so then also Lisa Bita, so then the relatives of the wife are usher, like all the halachas of the relatives of a wife. I'll ask you a question on this, and what we learned in the Mishnah here and in the Braise. It's another Braise where it says, Haniton mina Isha. If there's a person that there's a rumor about this, that he had a relationship with a woman, so then also bi'imo bebita ba'chaisa. So now the relatives that are usually also for a person's wife, over here, the mother, the daughter, the sister, will also be also to you if there's a rumor that he had a relationship with this woman. So how could our Mishnah say that the arayis do not apply, the relatives of a woman do not apply if it wasn't a marriage, it was just a relationship he had with her? And says the Gemara midrabanan. This praisa that's saying that it's aser is only isser midrabanan. Minat Torah though, the isser does not apply. Fragt the Gemara, but how does that fit into the lashon of the Mishnah here? V'chal heiche de iki surim midrabanan. In any case where there would be a isser midrabanan, tni naisin lechatchila, does the Mishnah say the word naisin, which would mean lechatchila, you can go ahead and marry any of these relatives? It's mashra from the Mishnah that there's no isser midrabanan either. It just says naisin. And says the Gemara, kitnan masnisen la'acha misa. When it says in our Mishnah naisin, it's talking over here about after misa. So as Rashi explains, before this woman that you had a relationship passed away, there's a gzeira midrabanan, that you may marry a relative, and once you marry a relative, because you once had a relationship with the first woman, the first, so once now you married a relative, you might go back and have a relationship with that woman. And at that point, it's a isser minat Torah. You married now a relative, and you might go back to that woman. So v'lei chachamim were geyser. But after that first woman you had a relationship with passed away, so then you don't have that concern. So then he's allowed to marry a relative l'chatchila. From where do we know this halacha that the isser of marrying your wife's relatives does not apply if she's not your wife? It was just a relationship, a nusa or pitui. The Tana Rabbanon, so we learned in the Braisa, B'kulon, by all the arayis, nema shchiva. The Torah uses the term shchiva. The kan, but over here when it comes to a person's wife's relatives, kicha. Nema kicha. The Torah uses the term kicha. Do not take any of those relatives. The reason is it's coming to tell you derech likuche and osra Torah, that the Torah only asers you to have a relationship with your wife's relatives if it's a wife. If it was likuchen, if you actually were married to her, and not if you just had a relationship with a woman. All that Rav Papa la Abaye. So based on this, Rav Papa asks Abaye, so gabi achaise. When it comes to the erva of a sister, not to live with a sister, the chsiv isha sheyikach es achaisai, basavev basima, a sister, whether you share the same father or same mother, hachinami derech kichu daasa derech shchiv v'sharia. You're going to say that that's only if you're marrying her, but not just to lie with her, to be with her. That is allowed. You can't say such a thing regarding a sister. And there the Torah does use the term yikach. Amalei. So Abaye answered, likuchen ksivi b'Torah stam. It says in the Torah the term likuchen, to yikach, to take, stam. In different cases it says this. Haroi lekiche kiche. In a case where we could interpret it literally that kiche means marriage and not just to be with her, so we interpret it that way. And that's how we are interpreting it over here regarding the relatives of a person's wife, that it's only if there was a kiche, your wife, then the Isser applies. But in a case where you can't teach it that way, and it must be any kind of relationship, like it is in the case of a sister, so even though it uses the term yikach, it means any kind of relationship is forbidden with a sister. Rava says there's a different source. Onasisha mutalisa bita, when a person had a relationship with a woman, not in marriage, against her will, so he's allowed to marry her daughter, even though usually the relatives of a wife are forbidden, but over here he's allowed. Mihacha, you learn from a different pasuk. Ksiv, there's one pasuk that says, Ervas bas binchoy bas bitcholoi segala. You're not allowed a relationship with your granddaughter, your son's daughter, your daughter's daughter. So what do we understand from this? Habaz binodido, bas bitodido, gali. But if it's your wife's daughter, your wife's granddaughter, so then it's not your daughter, it's just a relative to your wife. That is allowed if it's not your granddaughter. But Uksiv, there's another pasuk where it says, Ervas isha ubita loisegala as bas benov, as bas bita loisikach. There's another pasuk where it says that the erva of the daughter of your wife, you should not have a relationship, not with her granddaughter in any way, her son's daughter, her daughter's daughter. Loisikach. So over here, the pasuk saying that you're not allowed to have a relationship with your wife's granddaughter, even if it's not your granddaughter. So how ketzad? So this is a contradiction here. Is the Isser only to your granddaughter, or is the Isser even to your wife's granddaughter, even if it's not your granddaughter? So the answer is kan ba'einsin. If it's a case that it's not really your wife, it's just someone you had a relationship ba'einis, so then if it's not your granddaughter, it's just your wife's daughter. In other words, it's not your wife actually, it's just this woman that you had a relation with her, and it's her granddaughter. So in such a case, it's going to be allowed, as we said, that if it's only a einis, so the relative to this woman that you were ma'anis is allowed, and kan b'nisuin. But if it's your wife, if you really married her, so then the granddaughter of your wife, even if it's not your granddaughter, but it's a relative to your wife, it'll be forbidden. Exactly like our Mishnah said. Says the Gemara, but if you have this contradiction and that's your source, maybe I should say in the reverse, that when it comes to a marriage, then your wife's relative is allowed, and when it comes to an einis, and it's not really your wife, then your wife's granddaughter is not allowed. And says the Gemara, arayis she'er ksivbuhu. When it comes to the isur of arayis, it says in the Torah the term she'er, which means someone that's a wife. She'er means married to you. B'nisuin ik she'er. So when you're married, this term of she'er applies. Ba'einsin leka she'er. But if you just had a relation with a woman against her will, this term of she'er does not apply. So Rabbi Yehuda disagreed, and he said, regarding the next case of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda said that a person is not allowed to have a relationship, just like he's not allowed to have a relationship with his father's wife, the same is also with an anusa of the father. My time at Rabbi Yehuda, what's the source of Rabbi Yehuda? The pasuk says, we had this whole thing earlier in the Masechta here. The pasuk says, La yikach ishes eshes aviv, a person should not marry his father's wife. And then it says, V'lo yigale knaf aviv, should not reveal his father's garment. What does this mean? So Rabbi Yehuda says, knaf shara aviv lo yigale, a garment that was exposed to your father, you should not reveal and have a relationship with her, which refers to an anusa of your father, even if it's not your father's wife. So how do we know that this knaf, this garment, refers to a woman that was an anusa to your father? Because Dichsiv mi'iluye dekra, or the Bach takes out Dichsiv mi'iluye dekra from the pasuk before. What does it say? And here the Bach puts in Dichsiv. Over there it says v'nasan isha shechev ima lavia naira chamishin kesef. That in a case of an einis, so you have to pay 50 silver coins. So because the pasuk before is talking about anusa, so over here when it says lo yigala knaf aviv, I compare it to what it says before, and this is also talking about an anusa, and the Torah is saying that you're not allowed to have a relationship with your father's anusa. That's from you the source. V'Rabbanan, and Rabbanan answered to this, if this pasuk of Lo Yigala Knaf Aviv came right immediately following the pasuk before that spoke about Anusa, then I would say like you said, but now that it doesn't come immediately after, because in between it says it says in between Lo Yikach Ish Es Eishes Aviv. So therefore, it's not, we don't learn from what it said before regarding an Anusa. So rather, what do I learn out from V'lo Yigala Knaf Aviv? I learn out what Rabbanan learned from here. What the pasuk is saying is that a woman that's waiting for Yibum, for your father, and is not yet married to your father, but you also have this lav of not, or this issa, this erva of not being allowed to have a relation with her. So what does the term, the garment of your father, mean in this context, that it's the Yevama that is waiting for your father? Kanaf haroy laviv lo yigala. This garment, this woman that is waiting, she's supposed to have yibum with your father. You're not allowed to have a relationship with her. But why do we need this pasuk to asa this? Mishom deidasai. Why don't we say that it would be anyways asa because this is your aunt? And it says the Gemara lav b'shnei lavin. You'll have to say, yeah, there's a second lav here, that the fact that it's your aunt and it's also the wife in waiting, so to speak, for your father. But there's another issue here as well, that since she's waiting for the yibum for your father, so she's not allowed to marry anybody else. There's an issa of Yevam l'shuk. So why do you need this issa over here that you're not allowed to marry her? And says the Gemara, lav b'shloisha lavin. So the Torah is adding that in this case will be over 3 lavin. Your aunt, and also the fact that it's asa l'shuk, and also the fact that she's knaf aviv, she's waiting for the marriage to your father. Or we can say, we're talking about this woman that was waiting for Yibum for your father, but your father passed away. So the Issa of Yevam l'shuk does not apply in such a case, but still, because she was waiting for your father, that's enough that the Torah says it's considered to be knaf or roy l'aviv. This was a garment that was roy for your father, and it'll be asr for you. The next piece of Gemara is a very unique piece of Gemara. It's a bunch of riddles that the Gemara says, one after the next. And the Gemara spells out the riddles to some extent. I'll read it and translate, but I'm not going to spell out all the riddles exactly. And it's riddles, so try to figure them out. So here we go. Zok the Heilige Gemara. Och me'av, a woman comes along and says that this person is a brother from my father, and v'loi me'aim, not from my mother, and v'hu baila, and he is also my husband. Again, v'hu baila de'aim, and he's also the husband of my mother. V'ano brata de'intese, and I am the daughter of his wife. That's a possibility of a case that could happen. So Amar Rami Bar Chama said about this case, the loy Rab Yehuda the Masnisin. This will not be according to Rab Yehuda in our Mishnah, because this is only possible if you say that a person is allowed to marry the anusa of his father. If he could marry the anusa of his father, so then it would be possible that this should be true, that this person should be the brother of the father and also her husband, and then she is the daughter as well, but not if you can't marry the anusa of the father, then this is not going to be possible. That's one case. Vaita the Gemara says, a woman comes and says, Achu is my brother, Ubriu is my son, Achse ana dahai the rina akasfoi. And I am the sister of this girl that I'm carrying on my shoulders. So what's the case? How is this possible? So here, the next few cases, most of the cases here that the Gemara will say in all these riddles are not going to be possible if you do it in a way that was mutter. It's only with forbidden relationships, and therefore the Gemara describes it regarding a guy. Mishkach hasla, this is possible. When a guy comes and has a relationship with his daughter, so then what's going to happen is it'll play out in this way, that this is his brother and this is his son, and the child that's born is also her sister. The next case, Shlom Allah Bri, a woman comes and says, peace to you, my son, Bar Achsechana. I am Bas Achsechana. I'm also the daughter of your sister. When is that possible? Mishkachas law, so that's possible by a guy that had a relationship with his granddaughter, and now she was born. So it's going to be so then in such a case, so this is her son, and she's also the daughter of his brothers. She's also a daughter of his sister. The next case, the Gemara says, which is basically the same case with a slight difference, but the Gemara gives an interesting introduction. Daloi, the dalu davla, those people that draw waters for the fields, to irrigate the fields, lepel b'chu seiser peiser. So it should fall to you. You should take this cryptic riddle and try to figure it out. And the riddle is as follows. The hai, the darina, the one that I'm living with is hu bar vano beras achua. So I am his son, and I am also hu bar again. Hu bar, he is my son. Vano beras achua, and I am the daughter of his brother. So when is that possible? Basically the same case like before. That is when a guy has a relationship with his granddaughter, but over here it's not the daughter's daughter, it's the son's daughter. So in such a case, this person will be her son, and she will also be his brother's daughter. Okay, weiter. Bia. Person comes and complains to somebody. Who's he complaining to? He's complaining to somebody that's related to him in many different ways. Me'ach, he's complaining to his brother, v'hu av, he's also a father, v'hu baal, and he's also a husband, v'hu bar baal, and he's the son of the husband, v'hu baila, the aim, and he's the husband of the father, v'ano brato de itzei, and I am the daughter of his wife, v'loyav pitul achua yasme b'nei brate, and nevertheless, even because of all these relationships, he does not give any bread to the Yisaimim, which are his brothers, and that are also the sons of his daughter. How is all this possible? So there's a few different details here. This is possible when you have a guy that had a relationship with his mother. That's the first thing that happened. And then bas, and she gave birth to a daughter. And then bas, and this same guy now came and had a relationship with his daughter. And then zakin, the grandfather, now came, and also had a relationship with this daughter. And banim, and gave birth to children. Okay, so then it's going to come out that all these things that we just said will apply, will be true. Another case, a woman comes and says, me and you are brothers and sisters. Me and your father are sisters. Ana v'imach achi. Me and your mother are sisters. So when is this possible? Mishkach asla. This is possible by a guy that first came and had a relationship with his mother. And she had 2 daughters. And then he came and had a relationship with one of those daughters. And she had 1 son. Now that other daughter that he did not marry, so this son refers to that sister, the sister of my mother. And this sister, says to her sister the following that the Gemara said before. Or she says to him, she says to this son what it said before. That I'm your brother and I'm your father's brother and so on. The last case that the Gemara says over here, Ana va'at b'nei achiana. Me and you are children from brothers. Va'avuch b'nei achiana. And your father is also the son of brothers. Ana va'avuch, that is. Ana va'avuch, I and your father are the son of brothers. Ana v'imach b'nei achi. Me and your mother are also the sons of brothers. So the Gemara says, this riddle, this is possible not only when there's a relationship which is asa, and the Gemara before always said it by a guy, but this is even possible in a way that it would be mutter. Kagain, Reuven sheyesh leishtei banis. Reuven had 2 daughters. And Shimon, his brother, came and married one of those daughters, which is allowed. And then V'asa bar Levi, a 3rd brother. Now the son of the 3rd brother, Levi, or cousin, came v'nasav chad minayu and married another one. V'ka'amale brei de Shimon lebar brei de Levi. And this is what the son of Shimon is saying to the grandson of Levi.